In the misty valleys of western North Carolina, 65-year-old widow Martha "Marty" Kincaid was about to uncover a secret buried for decades. What started as inspecting her $10 crumbling mill took a shocking turn when her dog Boone pawed at the Waterwheel, revealing bundles of decaying cash, $3 million hidden inside. Marty, a retired park ranger known for courage and sharp instincts, had no idea she was stepping into danger and moral conflict. What began as a peaceful retirement would ignite a fight for justice and change Whisper Creek forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The road to Whisper Creek wound through a dense canopy of maples and oaks, their late autumn leaves bleeding orange and rust beneath the mist. Martha "Marty" Kincaid gripped the steering wheel of her old Ford Ranger, her arthritic fingers stiff from the drive. Boone, her golden retriever, sat upright in the passenger seat, nose pressed to the window, tail thumping in rhythm with the rough gravel beneath the tires. Almost there. "Boy," she murmured, her voice low, weathered by solitude. $10 for a piece of history. What could go wrong? The truck crested a rise, and there it was, the Kittrell Mill. Even in ruin, it held a kind of tragic majesty. The tall wooden structure slouched against the riverbank like an old soldier long past his prime. Moss crept along its siding, and the waterwheel, once the heart of its rhythm, lay half-collapsed, its paddles choked by vines. The creek ran thin beneath it, whispering softly over stones slick with time. Marty cut the engine. The silence that followed was almost reverent. She stepped out, breathing in the damp, earthy air. The sound of the forest filled in around her, wind sighing through bare limbs, the distant call of a crow, Boone's excited sniffing at the weeds. She stood for a long moment, just taking it in. For all its decay, the mill felt alive, watching, waiting. "Home sweet home," she said, though her voice cracked halfway through the words. The county deed was still folded in her coat pocket. Bought at auction for $10, more out of sentiment than sense. She'd once worked nearby as a ranger before her husband Dan passed. The mountains had always been her solace. Now in her 65th year, they were all she had left. She walked slowly along the creek's edge, Boone trotting beside her. The boards of the old mill groaned as the wind shifted through its gaps. She touched the weathered siding, felt the faint pulse of damp wood. "You've seen better days," she whispered. Boone froze, ears perked, staring at the collapsed waterwheel. A low growl rumbled from his throat. "What is it, boy?" He barked once, sharp, insistent, and pawed at the soil near the wheel's base. The ground was soft there, disturbed, darker than the rest. Marty crouched, her knees protesting. "Probably a raccoon nest or something," she muttered. Boone didn't seem convinced. He kept pawing, digging small clumps loose, until she caught a whiff of something metallic and damp, old iron and rot. She straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. "All right, Boone, enough. You're gonna dig to China." The dog whined softly but obeyed. Still, when she turned toward the truck to fetch her tool bag, she couldn't shake the image of that dark patch of earth. It looked like the ground itself was breathing. Later that afternoon, Marty drove into town. Whisper Creek wasn't much anymore. One diner, a gas station, a general store with faded lettering, and a post office that looked ready to collapse under the weight of its own history. Inside the diner, conversation quieted as she entered. Locals glanced up from their coffee cups, measuring her with the polite curiosity small towns reserve for outsiders. "Afternoon," she offered with a nod. A waitress in her 50s, apron dusted with flour, smiled cautiously. "You're the lady who bought the Kittrell place, ain't you?" Marty nodded. "That's me." The waitress exchanged a look with the man at the counter. "Well, bless your heart. That old mill's got stories." "Stories?" Marty asked. The man spoke up, voice gravelly from years of cigarettes. "Ain't a soul lasted more'n a season out there. Place is cursed, far as some folks say." "Cursed how?" He shrugged. "Depends who you ask." Some say folks disappeared out there back in the 30s. Others say it's just bad luck. Either way, Whisper Creek's got long memories. Marty's lips curved into a faint smile. Well, I've dealt with worse than bad luck. The man studied her a moment longer. You keep that dog close, ma'am. He'll know before you do if something's wrong. She finished her coffee in silence. When she stood to leave, the waitress added quietly, "If you hear something at night, don't go looking." The afternoon light was fading when she returned to the mill. The sun dipped low behind the mountains, casting long shadows that stretched across the river. Boone bounded ahead, tail wagging, as if eager to prove the mill harmless. Marty unloaded her tools and walked the perimeter again, noting the warped boards, the cracked stone foundation, the way the waterwheel seemed to lean toward the creek like a weary old man. "Rot everywhere," she muttered, prying at a rusted hinge. "Gonna take months just to make this safe." A crunch of gravel behind her made her turn. A man stood near the edge of the clearing, a tall figure in a tan sheriff's jacket, broad-shouldered, with sunburned skin and grey threading through his beard. His hand rested casually on his belt, near the badge clipped to his hip. "Ma'am," he greeted, voice measured. "Sheriff Caleb Rowe." Marty wiped her palms on her jeans. "You're not here to tell me the place is haunted too, are you?" His mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Not officially. Just wanted to welcome you, make sure you knew what you were getting into." "I bought it fair and square," she said. He nodded. "You did. $10, right?" "Not to argue with that." His eyes drifted toward the mill. "Kittrell Mill's got some history. My granddad used to talk about it, said it ran liquor during Prohibition. Folks made good money till one day the whole operation just vanished. People too vanished." She repeated. He shrugged. "That's how stories go around here. Might be half true, might be none of it. But this place—" He paused, scanning the building as if it might speak. "It's got a way of keeping secrets." Boone barked from near the waterwheel again, sharp and uneasy. Caleb's gaze followed the sound. "That dog's smart. You listen to him." A dark silhouette stepped from behind a pine, just far enough to be visible. "You should have stayed in town, Mrs. Kincaid. That mill's history isn't yours to dig up." "You've been trespassing," she said. "I ought to call the sheriff." He smiled, cold and easy. "Sheriff can't help you with this. My family's business doesn't end with paperwork." She took a step back, hand inching toward her revolver. Boone barked fiercely, teeth bared. Lawson's smile faded. "You think I don't know what you found? My grandfather hid more than money. He hid what would have ruined this whole county." "What are you talking about?" "Proof," Lawson said softly. "Proof of what they did to him. And if that gets out, my family loses everything." Her heart pounded in her ears. "So you'd kill for it?" He stared at her, eyes unreadable. "I'd protect what's mine." For a moment neither moved. The creek murmured between them, quiet and cold. Then Boone lunged forward, barking furiously, breaking the tension. When Marty looked back, Lawson was gone, vanished into the trees as though he'd never been there. She ran back to the cabin, locking the door behind her. Boone circled the room, still growling low. She sat at the table, the old ledger open before her, the ink shimmering faintly in the lamplight. The words, "funds secured beneath wheel until resolution," echoed in her mind. Resolution. That wasn't about money. It was about something else. A cover-up. A promise never kept. She traced her finger along the faded line, realizing that the bundles hidden in her wall weren't just cash. They were evidence, evidence worth killing for. She looked toward the window. In the distance, down by the creek, a single light flickered near the mill, and this time it wasn't fog. The rain returned before dawn, heavy and cold. It drummed against the tin roof of the cabin like restless fingers, and the sound bled into Marty Kincaid's dreams, thick, drowning dreams of the mill wheel turning under crimson water. When she woke, Boone was already pacing at the door, hackles raised and teeth bared at nothing she could see. She sat up, rubbing her temples. The ledger lay open on the kitchen table, the fragile pages marked with her notes from the night before. Candle wax had pooled across the wood, hard and yellow like old honey. Every name, every figure in that ledger tied back to Rhett Lawson Sr. and through him to a network of shipments and holdings dated between 1934 and 1937. Marty had spent most of the night decoding the entries, numbers disguised as grain weights, initials substituted for cash deliveries. It wasn't just bootlegging, it was money laundering, insurance fraud, and something worse buried in the fine script of one late entry, a single line dated December 14th, 1936, Mkittrell secured. Witness disposed. Marty traced the letters again, a cold pit forming in her stomach. The mill's last owner before it was abandoned, Michael Kittrell, had disappeared without explanation. Town history chalked it up to an accident during a winter flood. But the ledger made it clear. Kittrell hadn't drowned. He'd been silenced, and Rhett Lawson's grandfather had been behind it. The thought made her sick. She leaned back in her chair, staring out the rain-streaked window. The mill stood shrouded in fog again, patient and watchful, as if waiting for her to dig deeper. Boone pressed against her leg, sensing her unease. "Guess we're in it now," she murmured, scratching his head. By mid-morning she drove into town. Her first stop was the Whisper Creek Historical Society, a cramped brick building that smelled of dust and mildew. Eleanor Nell Davenport was there, hunched over a box of old photographs with her ever-present cup of black coffee. "Marty Kincaid," Nell said, looking up. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have," Marty replied, setting the ledger down between them. Nell's eyes widened. "Where in God's name did you get this?" "Found it near the mill," Marty said. "It belonged to the Lawsons. And it's not just old accounting, it's evidence." Nell adjusted her glasses, scanning the pages. The more she read, the deeper her frown grew. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. "This isn't just smuggling. They were using the mill to funnel stolen insurance payouts from the mining company back in the 30s. When that shaft collapse killed those workers, they faked losses, pocketed the settlements. $3 million worth, Marty said. Nell flipped to the final entries. "And this Kittrell fellow, they must have paid him to keep quiet about the operation. When he threatened to go to the papers, they buried him and called it an accident." Marty clenched her fists. "That money in my wall, it's part of the same scheme." Nell leaned back, exhaling. "And Rhett Lawson's still out there hunting for it. His family's name would go up in flames if this ever got out. Then we make sure it does." Nell's eyes snapped to hers. "Marty, if you go public with this, you're not just poking a hornet's nest, you're stepping in it. Rhett's got half the county in his pocket, including the zoning board. He'll come for you. I'm not afraid of him. You should be." Nell's tone softened. "I know you think you're doing what's right, but I've seen how men like him work. They don't fight fair. If he suspects you've got proof, he'll burn your life down to keep it quiet." Marty said nothing for a long moment. She stared at the rain sliding down the window pane, thinking of her late husband's old saying, "Right's not what's easy. It's what's left when easy's gone." Finally she stood. "Then I'll just have to be harder to burn." That evening, Sheriff Caleb Rowe showed up at her cabin again, mud on his boots. His patrol truck parked half-hidden under the trees. "Marty," he said, stepping inside, "we need to talk." She gestured to the chair opposite hers. "If this is about Rhett, I already know." His jaw tightened. "Then you know he's been raising hell in town. Told the council you're squatting on stolen property. Claims the mill's part of his family estate. That mill was county property for 40 years. Don't matter to him. He's got lawyers from Asheville already drafting a motion." Rowe sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Look, off the record, I think Lawson's scared. He's been digging up old archives, trying to erase something. You wouldn't happen to know what that is, would you?" Marty hesitated. Then she slid the ledger across the table. Rowe flipped it open, scanning quickly. His expression hardened. "Holy hell. This is criminal conspiracy, fraud, murder." "Then do something about it," she said. "I will," he replied quietly. "But we've got to be careful. Lawson's father was connected to more than just bootlegging. You stir that pot and every rat in this county comes running. So what do we do?" Ro looked at her, then at the ledger. We hide this, for now, and we find someone outside county lines, someone who'll listen. You trust that reporter friend of yours? Abigail Carter? Marty nodded. She's good. Exposed that mining scandal last year. Then call her, Ro said. If we can get this to the papers before Lawson buries it, we might just have a chance. 2 nights later, Abigail Carter arrived in a mud-splattered sedan. She stepped out wearing a raincoat, an expression that said she'd already guessed more than she let on. You really know how to pick retirement projects. Mrs. Kincaid, she said dryly as Marty greeted her. Call me Marty. And yeah, guess peace and quiet wasn't in the cards. Inside, Abigail spread her notes across the table, flipping through the ledger while Boone snored by the fire. This is good, she said, eyes sharp. Too good, actually. If this goes public, it could dismantle half of Whisper Creek's power structure. Then let's do it. Not yet. We need corroboration, proof Kittrell was murdered, proof Lawson's family benefited. Abigail tapped a pen against her lip. If we can find the original insurance contracts or death certificates from that mine collapse, we've got them nailed. Nell chimed in from her chair. County archives might have microfilm records. Trouble is, Lawson's got his cousin running that office now. So we go after nightfall, Abigail said matter-of-factly. You two up for a little trespassing? She nodded back but didn't stop. She had too many questions of her own. That night, back at the cabin, she stood by the fire again. Boone asleep at her feet. The flicker of flame reflected off her glass, off the framed photo of Dan, off the faint outline of the hutch hiding her secret. I don't know what I've started, she said quietly, but I'm in it now. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. The creek whispered faintly in the distance, and far down the valley, through fog and darkness, the Kittrell mill stood silent, its wheel unmoving, its secrets restless beneath the soil. Tomorrow, Marty knew she would have to dig deeper, not just into the ground, but into the truth of what had been buried there for nearly a century. The morning after the storm carried an eerie calm, the kind that followed trouble rather than ended it. Mist pooled low in the hollows, wrapping the valley in a pale shroud. The Kittrell mill stood silent again, but something about the air told Marty Kincaid she wasn't the only one awake early. Boone was restless from the moment she stepped onto the porch. He sniffed the air, hackles raised, pacing toward the edge of the clearing. Marty followed his gaze. Down by the creek, half veiled in mist, lay the faint impression of boot prints, fresh ones. They weren't hers. She crouched, brushing her fingers across the mud. The tracks led from the tree line toward the mill and back again, overlapping in a nervous, uneven pattern. Whoever had been there wasn't just passing through. They'd been searching. Her stomach twisted. She rose slowly and whispered, "We're not alone, boy," Boone barked once. Sharp and low, Marty stood there a long while, scanning the woods before finally heading back inside. She packed her revolver, a battered .38 Dan had left behind, and slid it into the inside pocket of her jacket. She wasn't planning to use it, but out here, plans had a way of changing fast. At the diner that afternoon, the atmosphere felt heavier than usual. Locals kept their voices low, eyes darting toward the door whenever it opened. The waitress, Annie Porter, leaned close as she set down Marty's coffee. "You heard? Someone broke into the old Massey barn last night. Tools missing. Sheriff thinks it's the same fella that's been creeping around the valley." Marty's hand froze on her cup. "He say who it was?" "No name yet, but folks swear they've seen lights by the mill after dark." Annie hesitated. "You still staying up there?" "Planning on it," Marty said flatly. Annie frowned. "You be careful. Old places hold more than dust. Sometimes they hold people's worst secrets." Marty forced a small smile, though her stomach was sinking, before she could reply. The diner door creaked open, and a tall man stepped inside, early 40s, unshaven, with the weather-beaten look of someone who'd lived too long outdoors. His coat was muddy, his boots worse, but his eyes, sharp gray, calculating, swept across the room and locked on Marty's. He nodded politely to Annie, ordered coffee, then took the counter stool 2 seats down. Marty didn't move. She recognized him, not by name, but by reputation. The Lawson family had more money than anyone in the county, and this man, Rhett Lawson, was known for buying up forgotten properties for historical preservation. Folks joked that meant gutting them for land deals, but the initials on that flask by the creek, Urdel, had burned into her memory. He turned slightly toward her. "Mrs. Kincaid, isn't it?" His voice was smooth, deliberate. "Heard you bought the old mill. Brave of you, taking that on at your age." Marty met his gaze evenly. "It's a project. Keeps me busy." He smiled faintly. "Beautiful spot, too. My granddaddy used to run that mill before it closed. Place has a lot of family history." The pause lingered. Marty took a slow sip of her coffee. "So I've heard." Rhett leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Funny thing, I drove by there the other day. Noticed someone's been digging under the wheel. You know anything about that?" Her heart stuttered. "Just fixing drainage," she said, steady as she could manage. He nodded, studying her face. "Of course. Wouldn't want a flood taking down all that history." Then he smiled again, pleasant, hollow, and turned back to his coffee. But the message was clear. He knew something. Marty left soon after, Boone waiting anxiously in the truck bed. She gripped the steering wheel tight all the way home. Every shadow along the road seemed to shift in the corners of her vision. When she reached the cabin, she didn't go inside right away. Instead, she walked to the hutch and pressed her palm against the wall where the money was hidden. Still there, safe, but now she understood. The money hadn't been forgotten. It had been left behind, and someone, maybe Rhett Lawson himself, wanted it back. That night the forest was alive with sound. The wind carried whispers through the trees, and every creak of the cabin felt amplified. Marty kept the revolver within reach on the table beside her. Boone refused to settle, pacing between the door and the window. Around midnight, headlights flashed briefly through the trees. There, then gone. Marty's pulse jumped. She killed the lantern and moved to the window, heart hammering. Through the darkness, she saw it, a pickup truck parked just beyond the creek. No lights, no sound, but the faint glow of a cigarette burned near the driver's side. Someone was watching the mill. She waited for nearly an hour, barely breathing. The cigarette flared again once, then vanished. When she finally dared to look a second time, the truck was gone, but the fear lingered long after. By dawn, Marty's mind was made up. She couldn't sit idle anymore. She had to know what she was dealing with. She returned to the mill, Boone close beside her. The ground near the Waterwheel showed fresh disturbance. Footprints again, deep and deliberate, circling the same spot she'd dug days ago. Someone had been searching for the compartment she'd already emptied. She crouched, running her hand along the mud until she found something glinting in the morning light. A thin metal tag. She wiped it clean. The inscription read, "Property of R.L. Lawson, Kittrell Mercantile, 1936. She slipped it into her pocket and glanced around. The forest was still, but she couldn't shake the sense of eyes watching her from the tree line. When she turned back toward her truck, she stopped cold. A figure was standing by the water's edge, a man in a dark coat, face shadowed beneath a wide hat. He didn't move. "Didn't speak. Who's there?" she called, hand drifting toward her jacket pocket. The figure tilted his head slightly, as though studying her. Then, without a word, he turned and melted into the fog. Boone barked furiously, lunging forward, but by the time Marty reached the spot, there was nothing, no footprints, no trail, just the steady murmur of the creek. She exhaled shakily. "You saw him too, didn't you?" Boone's ears twitched. He gave a soft whine and pressed against her leg. Later that afternoon, Sheriff Rowe stopped by again. This time, his manner was less casual. "You didn't tell me Rhett Lawson's been sniffing around your property," he said, removing his hat. "You two crossed paths." "Ran into him in town," Marty admitted. "He said the mill used to belong to his family." "Belonged, yeah. That's a stretch, though. County records say otherwise." Rowe scratched his chin. "You didn't notice anything missing, did you?" Marty hesitated. "Just some tools out by the mill. Maybe trespassers." Rowe nodded slowly. "You call me if you see him again. Lawson's got a habit of poking where he shouldn't. He's been trying to buy up half this valley, claims he's preserving history, but I think he's hunting something else." "Like what?" Rowe's eyes narrowed. "Rumor is his granddaddy stashed money from an insurance scam before the war. Never recovered. Folks say it was buried near the mill. Could be just a story, but Lawson's been mighty obsessed with digging up the truth. Marty's blood ran cold. She kept her face neutral, though her hands trembled faintly. That's quite a tale. Yeah, Rose said, pulling on his hat. Just make sure you're not caught in the middle of it. When he left, she sat by the window, staring out at the grey horizon. Boone whined softly beside her. Caught in the middle, she murmured. Too late for that. That night she dreamed of the mill, of water turning black and red beneath the wheel, of bundles of cash floating downstream like dead leaves. When she woke, Boone was whining again, scratching at the door. The clock read 3:12 a.m. Might as well see what's got you riled, she muttered, slipping on her coat. The moonlight broke through the clouds in fractured silver bands. The forest shimmered faintly with dew. Boone led her toward the creek, where the mill loomed dark and silent. Then she saw it, fresh tire tracks near the path. Mud splattered deep, leading away toward the main road, and something else, half buried near the wheel, a small leather satchel. She knelt and pulled it free. Inside were old documents, ledger pages yellowed and fragile, listing transactions from 1935 to 1937. At the bottom of one sheet, a signature leapt out at her, Rhett Lawson Sr., but beside it, written in faded ink, was another line, funds secured beneath wheel until resolution. Her heart pounded. So it was real. The money had been deliberately hidden, not lost. Before she could think further, Boone growled, a deep, warning growl that made her blood turn cold. Behind her, something shifted in the trees. She turned the flashlight. A branch cracked. Who's out there? She called. No answer. The forest held its breath, then faintly. Her voice drifted through the fog, a man's voice, calm, measured. You've got something that belongs to me. Her flashlight trembled in her grip. Lawson? Caleb steps back, horrified. Jesus Christ. Evie whispers, it's learning through life. The organic and the machine. The chamber hums faintly. Somewhere beneath the ice, something moves. Suddenly, a gunshot ricochets off the steel. Klein's team has breached the corridor. Evie dives behind a console as bullets spark off metal walls. Mark returns fire, shouting for them to fall back. Klein herself enters the chamber, gun drawn, expression calm, but eyes conflicted. Evie, she calls out, you have no idea what you're tampering with. Evie stands slowly, weapon leveled. You knew about this. You knew Danny was alive. Klein's jaw tightens. He wasn't supposed to die. He believed he could destroy it, but the organism adapted to him. His DNA is in that thing. Evie's breath catches. You're lying. I wish I were, Klein says softly. We needed his genetic key to deactivate it. Without it, it can't be contained. As they speak, the sealed pod begins to hiss, fractures spiderwebbing across the glass. A low, pulsating sound fills the room, like a heartbeat magnified through metal. Mark shouts, we need to go now. The glass shatters. A wave of cold mist engulfs the room, and from it emerges a warped, half-organic shape, flesh and metal twitching in unnatural rhythm. Evie fires, but the thing doesn't fall. It melts into the shadows, disappearing through a service vent. The alarms wail. Red lights flash. Klein lowers her weapon, pale. You just unleashed the one thing Danny died to stop. The snow began again that night, fine, whispering flakes that blurred the ridgelines into white ghosts. The wind carved low moans through the trees, and the old logging road had vanished beneath another 6 inches of powder. The cabin stood alone, flickering amber through its frosted windows, a single outpost of warmth in a world swallowed by ice. Inside, Evie Carter moved like a woman walking through a dream. Her eyes shadowed, her rifle leaning against the table beside her. Mark sat near the stove, warming his hands, his badge tucked away in his pocket, as if even he knew it meant nothing out here. Across from him, Agent Rebecca Klein leaned forward, her elbows on her knees, eyes locked on Evie, with the quiet intensity of someone used to being obeyed. Between them, the thing that had brought them all together sat on the table, the oilskin-wrapped canister, still crusted with frozen blood from the elk's ribcage. Evie couldn't stop staring at it. It's not just military, Klein said finally, her voice low. It's classified under a project that doesn't exist on paper. Biometric adaptive research. That canister contains samples, DNA, possibly synthetic tissue, taken from field subjects during experimental deployments. Field subjects? Mark repeated. You mean people? Klein's jaw tightened. In some cases, and animals used for adaptive testing. The company your husband worked for was part of it. Evie's breath hitched, her knuckles white around the tin cup she held. You're telling me Danny was part of this? I'm telling you, Klein said carefully. He might have tried to expose it. Silence. Only the creak of the stove and the sound of the storm pressing against the walls. Mark leaned forward. Then why hide the canister in an elk? Because someone was chasing him, Klein answered. He must have had nowhere left to go. He used the terrain. Animals die up here all the time. It was the perfect place to bury evidence no one would think to look. Evie's voice trembled. Until Buck found it. At her feet the Malamute stirred, ears flicking. Outside the wind shifted, carrying a faint thump, distant, rhythmic. Like boots crunching snow, Klein froze. Mark reached for his pistol. Evie moved to the window and parted the curtain with 2 fingers. Down the slope, barely visible through the storm, a pair of lights bobbed in the darkness, headlamps moving fast. They found us, Klein whispered. The next minutes unfolded in tense, wordless precision. Klein extinguished the lanterns. Mark checked his revolver, the motion mechanical, practiced. Evie slung her rifle over her shoulder and looked toward the back door. Who are they? Mark asked. Klein hesitated. Not my team. Not anymore. They slipped out into the storm, Buck padding silently beside them. The snow muffled everything, the wind, their breath, their fear. The trees rose black and skeletal, their limbs weighed down with frost. The lights below grew brighter, closer. Evie led them toward the tree line, where she'd built her old trapping line years ago. Beyond it lay a half-frozen creek that cut through the valley like a scar. If they could make it to the other side, the canyon walls would hide them, but they were too late. A voice cut through the wind. Evie Carter, drop your weapon and step into the open. The shout came from a man, distorted by a megaphone, but there was no badge in his tone. It was the voice of someone who already considered them dead. Klein swore under her breath. Private security, subcontractors. They're not here to talk. Evie's chest constricted. Then we run. Gunfire cracked. Snow burst into white plumes where the rounds struck the trees. Buck barked, and Evie grabbed his collar, dragging him behind the ridge. Mark returned fire, his muzzle flashing orange in the darkness. Go! He yelled. They scrambled downhill, the snow swallowing their feet. A flare arced overhead, bathing the forest in red light. Evie stumbled as she reached the creek, the canister slung in her pack, thudding against her back. Klein slid beside her, gasping. We have to lose them. There's a maintenance tunnel, old mining shaft, 1/2 mile east. You know this area? Mark shouted. Klein's eyes met his. I was briefed. They thought Danny died out here. They sent me to confirm it 2 years ago. Evie froze. You've been here before? Not for long, Klein said, panting. I found the wreckage. I found his tags, but no body. The words cut through the storm like a blade. They reached the mine entrance just as the shooting stopped. The world fell into eerie quiet. The shaft's mouth gaped open, rimmed with ice and tangled roots. Evie ducked inside first, flashlight beam cutting across the frozen walls. The passage narrowed, the floor sloping downward until the light barely reached ahead. The air was stale, metallic. Somewhere deep inside, the slow drip of water echoed like a clock ticking in another world. Marty knelt beside Boone, running her hand over his back. He's just adjusting. Maybe, the sheriff said, tone thoughtful. Still, take care out here. Nights get real dark in these valleys. She met his eyes, steady, not intimidated. I like the dark. Makes it easier to see what doesn't belong. Something flickered behind his gaze. Approval, maybe, or warning. He tipped his hat and walked back toward his cruiser, gravel crunching beneath his boots. When the taillights disappeared down the road, Marty turned back to the mill. The forest had gone still again. The only sound was the creek's slow whisper and Boone's restless breathing. She exhaled long and low. We'll be fine, she told herself. It's just an old building. But when the wind shifted, she thought she heard something, soft, rhythmic, coming from inside the mill, not the creak of timber or the flap of loose boards. It sounded like whispering. Boone growled low, pressing close to her leg. Marty's pulse quickened. She looked toward the open doorway where darkness pooled like ink. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw movement, a shadow slipping deeper into the black. "Hello?" Her voice echoed against the walls, unanswered. Silence. She stepped back, her breath visible in the cooling air. Boone tugged at her sleeve with his teeth, urging her toward the truck. "All right," she murmured. Tomorrow. They left the mill to the night, its broken water wheel turning slightly in the breeze. The creek murmured on, carrying secrets down the valley as the last light bled from the sky. And though she didn't know why, Marty looked back one last time before the bend in the road swallowed it from view. For a fleeting instant, she could have sworn the mill's top window was glowing faintly from within. That night, long after she settled into her small cabin up the ridge, Boone woke her with a low growl. His nose pointed toward the door. His fur bristled. Marty listened. Nothing. Then, faintly, so faint it could have been her imagination, she heard the sound of rushing water. The creek. But it wasn't steady. It came in waves, like something moving beneath it. Boone whined softly and pawed at the door. She rose, wrapped her robe tighter, and looked out the window toward the dark silhouette of the valley below. The mill stood somewhere down there, hidden in the fog, and she could have sworn that for just a moment she saw the faintest flicker of light near the water wheel. Something was down there, something Boone had already sensed. Tomorrow, she promised herself. Tomorrow, she'd find out what it was. The next morning broke grey and still, the fog hanging low over Whisper Creek like a secret that refused to lift. Marty Kincaid poured herself a mug of coffee and stared out her cabin window. Boone was already awake, pacing near the door, tail stiff, eyes alert toward the valley below. All right, she muttered, sliding into her boots. You win. By the time they reached the mill, the fog had thinned to a soft haze. The water wheel loomed before them, half-submerged, skeletal, its timbers slick with moss. The faint trickle of the creek was the only sound. Boone trotted ahead, nose to the ground, his instincts pulling him back to the same spot beneath the wheel where he'd dug the day before. Persistent old fool, she said. But she followed him anyway. The soil was looser than she remembered. She knelt and brushed her fingers across it. Damp, crumbly, as if something had disturbed it recently. Boone pawed again, this time deeper, and his claws scraped against metal. Marty frowned. What have you got there, boy? She pulled on her gloves and dug beside him, clearing away handfuls of earth until a rusted iron plate appeared. It was set flush against the base of the water wheel's axle housing, camouflaged by age and grime. She leaned closer. There were old hinges, barely visible beneath the corrosion. Her pulse quickened. She fetched her crowbar from the truck and wedged it under the edge. The metal protested with a shriek that echoed across the valley. Boone barked once, startled, but she kept prying. With one last heave, the panel gave way and clattered open, releasing a damp, musty odor. Inside was darkness. And something else. Bundles. Marty pulled one free and sat back on her heels. The object was wrapped in oilcloth, brittle with age, tied with string that crumbled at her touch. Her fingers trembled as she peeled it open. Inside were stacks of bills, U.S. currency, but unlike any she'd seen in circulation, the paper was thick, the ink faded. Some of the edges had rotted away, but most were intact. She squinted at the print, Series 1928. "Oh, my God," she whispered. She peeled back more oilcloth, another bundle, and another. There were at least a dozen, each heavy and damp, but unmistakably full of money. Her breath hitched as realization settled in. There had to be millions here or close to it. Boone barked again, a sharp sound that snapped her out of her trance. She looked around. The forest was silent. No wind, no birds, nothing. Only the sound of water trickling under the wheel. "All right," she murmured. Let's just cover this for now." She shoved the plate halfway back into place, enough to conceal the hole, and hurried the bundles into an old canvas sack she found near the door. Boone trotted beside her as she made her way back up the ridge to her cabin, her heart hammering. Inside, the dim light of morning filtered through dusty windows. Marty set the sack on the kitchen table and stared at it. $3 million, maybe more, rotting in the dirt for nearly a century. She thought of calling Sheriff Rowe. It was the sensible thing to do. Hell, it was what Dan would have told her to do, but the words of the waitress from the diner whispered through her mind, "If you hear something at night, don't go looking." What would the sheriff do, really? Confiscate it, call in state authorities, dig up the property? It'd be headline news. And if there was truth to those stories about Prohibition-era money, there'd be questions, dangerous ones. She sat down, staring at the bundles for a long moment. She didn't see money, she saw freedom. Freedom from the mortgage that had eaten through her savings after Dan's hospital bills. Freedom to fix the leaking roof, the crumbling porch, maybe even to help the town that was slowly dying around her. Her conscience screamed against it. But temptation was louder. She opened another bundle and counted tens, 20s, 50s, old design, some stamped with Federal Reserve seals. Others marked National Bank of Asheville. Most were brittle but legible. It felt wrong. It also felt like fate. By afternoon, she'd constructed a false panel in her cabin wall, behind the old hutch Dan had built decades ago. The hollow between the studs was narrow, but deep enough to hide the bundles. She wrapped each one carefully in wax paper and slid them inside, sealing the panel with nails and a coat of matching paint. When she stepped back, it looked untouched. Boone lay on the rug, watching her. His eyes seemed to question her decision. "Don't look at me like that," she said softly. "It's not stealing if it doesn't belong to anyone anymore, right?" He didn't move. She poured herself a glass of whiskey, Dan's old habit she'd picked up after his death, and sat by the fire as dusk fell. The flames danced across her tired face, throwing shadows that seemed to flicker with unease. She told herself she'd sleep on it. Maybe call Caleb in the morning. That's when a knock rattled her door. Boone jumped up, barking. Marty froze, glass halfway to her lips. The knock came again, 3 short raps. She set the glass down and unlatched the door. Sheriff Caleb Rowe stood on her porch, hat in hand, his expression apologetic. "Sorry to drop by unannounced, ma'am. Saw your truck down by the mill this morning. Thought I'd check in." Her heart skipped. "Everything all right?" "Mostly. Just routine." He glanced past her into the cabin, his gaze lingering on the hutch for a fraction too long before shifting back. "Figured you might have found something interesting down there. Old tools, bottles, that sort of thing. The mill's a local time capsule." Marty forced a smile. "Mostly rotten raccoon droppings. Not exactly treasure," he chuckled lightly. "Fair enough. Though, if you do come across anything, cash, papers, whatever, it'd be good to let us know. A lot of those old sites are technically part of county record. Never know what's considered evidence in these parts." She swallowed hard. "Evidence of what?" "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." His tone softened. "History! And not all of it's proud. My granddad was sheriff back when the mill closed. Whole lot of things went missing then. Money, people, maybe even records. He never talked about it much," Boone growled quietly. Caleb glanced down, then nodded. "That dog's sharp. Reminds me of my old hound." "He's protective," Marty said. "Good trait to have out here." A silence hung between them, thick with unspoken tension. Finally, Caleb tipped his hat. "Didn't mean to intrude, just be careful, Mrs. Kincaid. The past has long shadows around here. I'll keep that in mind." When he left, she locked the door and leaned against it, heart pounding. Boone pressed close to her leg. "Long shadows," she whispered. "Yeah, no kidding." That night, rain swept through the valley. The wind howled through the eaves, and every creak of the cabin seemed amplified. Marty couldn't sleep. Her thoughts kept circling back to the bundles, hidden. Silent, waiting around midnight, Boone began pacing again. Ears pricked. "Not now," she muttered. But then she heard it too, faint movement outside. Not wind, not rain, footsteps on the porch. She grabbed her flashlight and stepped to the window. The beam cut through sheets of rain, but the porch was empty. Boone growled low, nose pressed to the doorframe. Probably an animal, she told herself. But she left the light on the rest of the night. By morning, the rain had washed the world clean. The mill looked somehow different in the pale light, less haunted, more curious. Marty made her way down after breakfast, Boone bounding ahead as if nothing had happened. She wanted to see the compartment again, to reassure herself it was real, not some fever dream of grief and greed. When she pried the plate open, the hollow was empty. Her heart lurched. She scrambled to check the sides, the soil. Nothing. Every last bundle she'd left was gone. She sat back, breathing hard. No, I took them all. Boone barked sharply and ran toward the creek, nose low, tail rigid. He stopped at the edge of the water and growled at something in the reeds. Marty followed and froze. There, half buried in mud, was a small tin flask, rusted but intact. She wiped it clean enough to see faint initials scratched into the side. R.L. She turned it in her hands, mind racing. The Kittrell mill had been owned by the Lawson family before it shut down. And if the old stories were true, Rhett Lawson, the same man now buying up land across the county, was their grandson. Boone barked again, louder this time, staring downstream. Marty's gaze followed, and for the briefest moment, she thought she saw a figure moving through the fog on the far bank, too tall for a deer, too still for a trick of light. Then it was gone. That evening, as she returned home, the world felt different, smaller, watching. She locked the door and checked the wall where she'd hidden the money. Still there, still safe. But now she wondered, if someone had been watching her at the mill, what did they want? She poured another glass of whiskey, sat by the fire, and tried to steady her hands. She thought of Dan again. His voice, calm and grounded. "Right's right, Marty. Even when no one's looking." She looked toward the hutch. "Maybe you're right," she whispered. "But I'm not sure I can afford right anymore." Boone lifted his head, eyes glinting in the firelight. He growled softly, the kind of growl that didn't come from fear, but from warning. Marty turned toward the window. Something, or someone, was out there. A flicker of movement near the tree line. She stood slowly, heart hammering, and lifted the curtain. The darkness pressed close, thick and unyielding. Then faintly, two pinpoints of light, like eyes, flashed and vanished. "Easy, boy," she whispered, but Boone's growl deepened. She waited another minute before retreating to her chair. She'd been alone for years, but this kind of solitude, where silence carried weight and darkness had intent, was something else entirely. She took a slow sip, letting the burn anchor her. Outside, the wind rose again, rattling the shutters, and beneath it all, faint but steady, she could swear she heard the mill, its creaking waterwheel turning slowly. Impossibly in the night, when dawn broke, Marty drove into town. She needed answers. The diner was nearly empty. The same waitress greeted her with a wary smile. "Morning, Mrs. Kincaid. How's the old mill treating you?" "Depends what you mean by treating," Marty replied. "You ever hear the name R.L.? "Someone who worked at the mill." The waitress frowned. "Rel, you mean Rhett Lawson's granddaddy? Folks said he ran the place before it closed." "Why?" Marty forced a neutral tone. "Found some old junk near the creek. Figured it might have been his." "Best not to stir that up," the woman said softly. "Lawsons don't like people digging into their past." When Marty left, she caught a glimpse of a familiar figure across the street. Sheriff Rowe, leaning against his cruiser, sipping coffee. He gave her a nod that was both greeting and question. Marty smirked. "Guess I'm not as retired as I thought." That night the trio drove into town, headlights off until they reached the back of the courthouse. The rain had eased to a drizzle, and thunder rolled faintly in the distance. Abigail picked the lock on the side door, surprisingly deft for a journalist, and they slipped inside. The archive room smelled of damp paper and old ink. Rows of filing cabinets loomed like sentinels in the flickering emergency light. Nell moved with uncanny speed for her age, rifling through drawers marked 1930, 1940. "Here," she whispered, pulling a roll of microfilm free. "Mining accident, December 1936. Abigail loaded it onto the reader, scrolling through images until the headline appeared. "Tragedy at Silver Creek Mine, 13 dead." The accompanying article named Kittrell as the site inspector. And then nothing. No follow-up. No obituary. Abigail frowned. Where's his death certificate? Nell reached for another roll, her hands trembling. Maybe filed separately. Try wait. From down the hall came the faint creak of a door. All three froze. Footsteps echoed, slow, deliberate. Marty motioned for silence. Boone growled low from her side. A beam of light swept across the hall, then another. 2 flashlights. Marty's breath caught. She glanced toward Abigail, who mouthed one word, "Run." They bolted down the narrow side corridor, papers scattering in their wake. Boone barked once, drawing the searchers' attention as they reached the emergency exit. The metal door screeched open into the rain-soaked alley. "Go!" Marty hissed. They sprinted to the truck. Behind them a shout rang out, male, angry, familiar. "Stop! You think you can steal from me again?" Rhett Lawson. A shot cracked through the rain, hitting the brick inches from Marty's head. She ducked instinctively, fumbling for the keys. Boone leapt into the truck bed as she slammed the door and peeled away from the courthouse. And tires spitting gravel. Headlights appeared in the rearview mirror almost instantly. "Damn it," Abigail muttered, loading a fresh roll of film into her bag. "He's following us." Marty's hands gripped the wheel. "Hold on." The road wound through the valley like a snake, each curve slick and treacherous. Lawson's truck stayed close, its lights a white fury behind them. Then Boone barked sharply, turning toward the right, the old fire road leading back to the mill. Marty swerved hard, headlights off. The truck jolted violently, mud spraying in arcs as they vanished into the trees. Lawson's headlights shot past on the main road, unaware of the turn. They waited breathless until the sound of his engine faded. Abigail exhaled shakily. "You've got a hell of a sense of direction, Mrs. Kincaid." Marty forced a grim smile. 60 years in these mountains. They still remember me." Back at the mill, the group caught their breath. Nell slumped onto a crate, hands trembling. "That man's insane," she said. "He'd have shot us if Boone hadn't barked." Abigail unrolled the microfilm, still wet from the rain. "We've got what we need," she said. "Once I scan this, I can send it straight to my editor." But before she could continue, Boone growled again, low, throaty. Marty froze. "What is it, boy?" From outside, headlights flickered through the cracks of the old mill wall. He'd found them. "Go!" Marty shouted. Out the back. They scrambled for the exit, rain slashing through the open doorway. Lawson's voice echoed through the darkness, taunting, unhurried. "You really think you can hide from me in my grandfather's grave?" A crash followed, a board splintering under his boot. Boone barked, lunging forward, but Marty held him back. "Abigail, the creek," she whispered. "Cross downstream. Get to the car. What about you?" "I'll hold him. Marty, go!" The two women hesitated only a moment before vanishing into the trees. Lawson stepped fully into the lantern light, soaked, furious, gun in hand. "You should have walked away." Marty raised her revolver. "So should you." They stared at each other through the hiss of rain, history and hatred hanging heavy between them. Lawson smirked. "You have no idea what's buried here." "Maybe not," she said, finger tightening on the trigger, "but I'll find out before you bury anyone else." He laughed once, sharp and humorless. "You won't live that long." Then the gunfire erupted. When the echo faded, the mill was silent but for the rain. Smoke curled faintly from the shattered doorframe. Marty leaned against a beam, chest heaving, the revolver still warm in her hand. Boone pressed against her leg, unhurt but trembling. She looked toward the creek. Abigail and Nell were gone, thank God, but Rhett Lawson's truck still sat outside, empty, and from somewhere in the darkness beneath the mill, the faint creak of wood echoed, followed by the sound of running water. She turned slowly toward it, realization dawning. There was another chamber below the wheel, one she hadn't found, and maybe, just maybe, that was where the real secret had been waiting all along. The storm eased just before dawn, leaving the valley wrapped in a heavy, suffocating mist. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of wet pine and cordite, gunpowder and sap. Marty Kincaid stood in the threshold of the ruined mill, revolver still clutched loosely in her hand. Boone pressed against her leg, his fur damp and shivering. Eyes fixed on the black maw of the mill's underbelly where the sound of running water echoed faintly. Rhett Lawson's truck sat crooked in the mud, its headlights flickering weakly before sputtering out. But of Rhett himself there was no sign. Marty's hands trembled as she reloaded the revolver. Each metallic click sounded unnaturally loud in the silence that followed the storm. Somewhere beneath her, the mill's foundation groaned, the same old bones of the structure creaking under decades of weight and rot. She took a deep breath and whispered, "Stay close, boy." Boone whined but obeyed as she stepped toward the trapdoor at the back of the mill. The boards there had warped and splintered over time, but the faint outline of a square hatch was visible under a layer of mud and sawdust. She knelt, brushed it clean, and found an iron ring set into the wood, rusted, almost solid. It took both hands and all her strength to pry it open. A gust of cold, earthy air rushed up from the darkness below, carrying the scent of water, mildew, and something else, something sharp, metallic, almost like blood. She lifted the lantern from the table, lit it with trembling fingers, and peered down into the shaft. A narrow stairway descended into the dark. Old stone walls glistened with moisture. The faint sound of rushing water echoed faintly, distant but constant. Boone whined again. "I know," she murmured. "But we've come too far to stop now." The stairs wound down farther than she expected, the air growing colder with every step. The stone under her boots felt slick, and twice she nearly slipped on the moss that coated the steps. The lantern's light barely pierced the shadows ahead. At the bottom, the passage opened into a low chamber, roughly carved out of bedrock, its walls streaked with mineral deposits. A trickle of water ran along a channel in the floor, feeding into the mill's wheel outside. But it wasn't the water that made Marty's breath catch. It was the room. Marty smiled faintly. "Guess I'll finally fix that roof." "Maybe plant a garden," Nell chuckled. "You deserve quiet." "Maybe," Marty said. "But quiet never lasts long around here." They fell silent, listening to the creek rush through the valley, down below, near the ruins of the mill. The sunlight caught on something half buried in the mud, a small brass tag marked Kittrell. Marty noticed it, her expression softening. "Looks like the dead finally got their say," Nell murmured. Marty nodded. "And the living finally learned to listen," Boone barked once, breaking the silence as if to confirm it. For the first time in a long while, the valley didn't seem to be hiding anything, but deep beneath the earth, beneath the broken timbers and the stone vault now, sealed by the flood, another tunnel branched away from the main chamber, and in its darkness, faint and forgotten, something metal glinted under the slow drip of water. The past. It seemed never stayed buried for long, the day after the confrontation. Whisper Creek seemed almost normal. The mist hung low over the valley, curling around the trees like smoke from an old fire, and the creek bubbled steadily past the remnants of the Kittrell mill. But beneath the quiet surface, tension lingered, the way a storm waits behind a ridge. Marty Kincaid walked along the creek bank, Boone padding faithfully at her side. Each step crunched over mud and fallen timbers, reminders of the night's chaos. Despite Rhett Lawson's death, Marty couldn't shake the feeling that the danger wasn't over. The vault had been found, the evidence in Abigail's hands, but there were still loose ends. Sheriff Caleb Rowe arrived from the North Road, leaning against his cruiser. His shoulder was bandaged, but he moved with his usual controlled calm. He held a folder thick with old records, his face set in a grim line. "We've been digging," he said. "Turns out my grandfather wasn't the man I thought he was." Marty's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Caleb opened the folder, revealing photographs and handwritten notes from decades ago. He helped cover up the deaths tied to the Lawson smuggling operation. He wasn't just negligent, he was complicit. All those disappearances in the 30s. "My family helped hide them to protect the Lawsons' reputation." Marty stared at him, the weight of his words pressing down like the mist itself. "You mean to tell me your family helped murder people?" "Indirectly," Caleb admitted. "But the truth is uglier. They weren't just protecting a business. They were protecting a legacy built on blood. That badge I wear, it was stained before I ever held it. Boone growled low, ears twitching at the distant sound of engines along the ridge. Marty glanced toward the road. Jonas Pike appeared, stepping from the tree line, hat in hand. His face was lined with worry, his eyes shadowed. "I know why you're all here," Jonas said quietly. "Because I know the tunnels." Marty's pulse quickened. "Explain," Jonas motioned toward the creek. "The vault we found? It's not the only one, my father. He tried to expose the Lawsons long ago. He hid evidence in these tunnels, thinking it would save the town. But he died before he could, and now the rest of it is still down there." Caleb's jaw tightened. "And you've just been wandering back into town, waiting for someone to stumble across it?" Jonas met his gaze steadily. "I've been hiding, watching, making sure no one got hurt. Until now," Marty exhaled slowly. "Then we go down there together." Abigail arrived at that moment, carrying her notebook and camera. "I'm coming too," she said. "If we uncover the rest, the story has to be told. People need to know how deep this corruption goes." The group stood at the edge of the vault entrance, the morning light catching on rusted iron and wet stone. Marty placed a hand on the wall. "We finish this. We uncover everything, and we make sure no one can ever hide it again." As they descended, the tunnel swallowed them in darkness. Water dripped steadily, echoing along the stone walls. Jonas led the way, Boone sniffing at every turn, alert to the faintest sign of danger. Within minutes, they came upon a branching corridor, partially collapsed but navigable. At its end, another sealed chamber waited. Smaller but brimming with crates, old ledgers, and stacks of papers bound in decaying string. The smell of mildew and oil permeated the air. Jonas carefully lifted the topmost crate. This is everything my father hid. Records of every shipment, every bribe, every murder covered up." Marty knelt beside it, brushing away layers of dust. "And Rhett thought killing himself, or being killed, would bury it all." Abigail's hands shook as she photographed each document. "Not a chance. This is solid evidence. With this, the county's history can be rewritten." Caleb's eyes lingered on the papers, then on Marty. "We've got a choice now. We can use this to bring every last Lawson heir to justice, or let it sit here, like everything else, rotting in the dark." Marty's gaze met Boone's. The dog looked back with a quiet certainty, as if understanding the gravity of what was to come. She nodded slowly. "We do it right. No shortcuts, no moral compromises. This town deserves that much." As they worked to transport the crates to the surface, a shadow passed over the tunnel's entrance. Boone barked sharply, hair bristling. "Not today," Marty muttered, gripping her revolver. "Not anyone else." The group moved carefully, emerging into sunlight with their haul. The valley lay quiet, almost holding its breath, the creek reflecting their shadows like a mirror of history. Marty looked at Caleb, then at Jonas, Nell, and Abigail. "This ends with us. We protect the truth, no matter the cost." And for the first time in years, the weight pressing on her chest felt manageable. The past was no longer a chain. It was a challenge, a responsibility, and she intended to meet it. Boone barked once, low and firm, as if agreeing. The creek continued to flow, carrying the secrets of Whisper Creek away from the shadows. But the echoes of betrayal would not be forgotten. Night had fallen over Whisper Creek, and a storm rolled in from the mountains. Wind lashing the trees and rain drumming against the roof of the Kittrell mill. Marty crouched near the mill's entrance, Boone at her side, ears flattened and teeth bared, alert to every shadow. Caleb moved quietly beside her, flashlight in hand, eyes scanning the tree line. Nell and Jonas worked to barricade doors and windows, while Abigail set up her camera equipment. The satellite feed ready to broadcast live. From the ridge above, muffled voices and the crunch of boots in mud carried down. Rhett Lawson's remaining men had come, desperate to reclaim the buried fortune, before the evidence could expose the family's century-long corruption. Marty's hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with the weight of responsibility. Every eye in the valley might now be watching them, and failure wasn't an option. A figure appeared at the edge of the clearing, silhouetted by lightning. Boone growled, advancing toward it, but Marty held him back. "Wait," she whispered. We move on my signal. Rhett's second in command, a tall man with a scar running across his cheek, shouted into the storm, "The money! Bring it back or burn it all!" Caleb tightened his grip on the revolver. "Not today," he muttered. "Not anyone else." Boone lunged as the first man tried the door. The dog's attack was precise and terrifying, toppling him into the mud. Chaos erupted as bullets struck the walls, splintering wood and sending water dripping from the roof. Marty grabbed a lantern and signaled Jonas to lead a flanking maneuver through the old tunnel system beneath the mill. Knowing the attackers wouldn't anticipate an underground counterattack, inside the tunnel, water splashed at their feet as they moved swiftly, emerging behind the remaining men. Caleb and Marty coordinated silently, cutting off escape routes. Boone barked sharply, corralling the attackers toward a dead end. Lightning illuminated Rhett as he charged toward the mill, fury etched on his face. Marty sidestepped, and a loose beam, loosened by the storm, collapsed, pinning Rhett beneath the massive waterwheel that had once powered the mill and concealed decades of secrets. The storm raged on, but inside the mill, a tense calm settled. Marty, drenched and exhausted, looked at Boone, Caleb, Nell, Jonas, and Abigail. They were battered but alive, and the truth at last was safe. Weeks had passed since the stormy night at Whisper Creek, and the valley was quiet again, though the echoes of that violent siege lingered in the air. Investigators had excavated the mill's tunnels, uncovering crates of records, ledgers, and the remaining hidden cash. Each document told the story of decades of corruption, cover-ups, and greed that had shaped the town's history. Marty stood at the edge of the creek, Boone at her feet, watching as trucks carried the recovered evidence to county headquarters. Caleb approached, removing his badge for a moment and wiping rain-soaked hair from his forehead. "We've got enough to finally clean this place up. My resignation's official. I'm running for commissioner. If we don't fix the system from the inside, nothing changes." Nell emerged from the mill, holding a thick stack of photographs and old records she had compiled into a cohesive narrative. "I've written the story of the mill," she said, voice trembling. "It's going to publish regionally. People need to understand what was buried, not just the money, but the lives lost and the lies told." Abigail adjusted her camera, reviewing footage from the siege. "My expose goes live tonight. Every bribe, every threat, every Lawson heir complicit, they'll all see it." Jonas, quiet as always, handed Marty a folded envelope. Inside was a single old dollar from the fortune, along with a short note. "For remembrance, may the creek always remind you of what's right." Marty tucked it into her coat pocket and glanced at Boone, who wagged his tail weakly, finally at rest. The mill, battered but standing, had become a symbol not just of survival, but of justice, truth, and rebirth. For the first time in years, Marty felt peace, not in hiding, not in solitude, but in having faced the shadows of the past and helped the town reclaim its soul. Months later, Whisper Creek had begun to heal. The Kittrell mill, restored and sturdy once more, turned slowly as water coursed through the newly repaired wheel. Marty stood on the deck, Boone lying at her feet, the dog's once restless energy now calm. The valley felt alive with possibility, the mist curling gently around the treetops, soft and forgiving. A small crowd had gathered for a memorial event, honoring both the history of the mill and the courage of those who had risked everything to protect the truth. Caleb, now commissioner-elect, addressed the townspeople, his voice steady and reflective. Nell's written account had been published, spreading the story far beyond the valley, and Abigail's expose had exposed the remaining Lawson heirs and their web of corruption. Jonas arrived quietly, lingering at the edge of the crowd. He handed Marty a folded photograph, an old picture of the mill workers from decades ago, their faces lined with sweat and hope. "For the story to keep living," he said, voice low, then melted back into the crowd. Marty placed the photograph near the water wheel, her fingers brushing the worn wood. She thought of all who had come before her, the hidden lives, the buried secrets, and the courage it had taken to face them. The creek whispered as it always had, carrying the past forward, not as a weight, but as a reminder. As she looked around, she realized she had found more than just justice for the town. She had reclaimed her purpose, connecting past and present, protecting truth as fiercely as she had once protected the forests. The mill, alive and turning, seemed to echo her own resilience. Marty smiled softly, Boone nuzzling her hand, and in that moment she knew that the creek would always whisper, but now it spoke of hope, courage, and the enduring power of remembrance. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot. Jonas, quiet as always, handed Marty a folded envelope. Inside was a single old dollar from the fortune, along with a short note. For remembrance, may the creek always remind you of what's right. Marty tucked it into her coat pocket and glanced at Boone, who wagged his tail weakly, finally at rest. The mill, battered but standing, had become a symbol not just of survival, but of justice, truth, and rebirth. For the first time in years, Marty felt peace, not in hiding, not in solitude, but in having faced the shadows of the past and helped the town reclaim its soul. Months later, Whisper Creek had begun to heal. The Kittrell mill, restored and sturdy once more, turned slowly as water coursed through the newly repaired wheel. Marty stood on the deck, Boone lying at her feet, the dog's once restless energy now calm. The valley felt alive with possibility, the mist curling gently around the treetops, soft and forgiving. A small crowd had gathered for a memorial event, honoring both the history of the mill and the courage of those who had risked everything to protect the truth. Caleb, now commissioner-elect, addressed the townspeople, his voice steady and reflective. Nella's written account had been published, spreading the story far beyond the valley, and Abigail's exposé had exposed the remaining Lawson heirs and their web of corruption. Jonas arrived quietly, lingering at the edge of the crowd. He handed Marty a folded photograph, an old picture of the mill workers from decades ago, their faces lined with sweat and hope. "For the story to keep living," he said, voice low, then melted back into the crowd. Marty placed the photograph near the waterwheel, her fingers brushing the worn wood. She thought of all who had come before her, the hidden lives, the buried secrets, and the courage it had taken to face them. The creek whispered as it always had, carrying the past forward, not as a weight, but as a reminder. As she looked around, she realized she had found more than just justice for the town. She had reclaimed her purpose, connecting past and present, protecting truth as fiercely as she had once protected the forests. The mill, alive and turning, seemed to echo her own resilience. Marty smiled softly, Boone nuzzling her hand, and in that moment she knew that the creek would always whisper, but now it spoke of hope, courage, and the enduring power of remembrance. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot. Wooden crates, rotting but intact, lined the walls. Metal barrels sat half buried under layers of silt. And at the center, a work table lay overturned. Its drawers spilled open. Marty lifted the lantern higher. The faded stenciling on the crates read, "Property of Silver Creek Mining Company, 1936. Her pulse quickened. She pried one open with the crowbar she'd brought from the truck. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were metal cylinders stamped with serial numbers, and beneath them stacks of old bank ledgers sealed in wax. Insurance claims, deposits, names. This was it. The original evidence, hidden for nearly 90 years. Boone barked suddenly, low and warning. She froze. A faint scrape came from the far end of the chamber, where the darkness pressed deepest. She turned slowly, lantern raised. At first she saw nothing. Then a flicker of movement. Rhett Lawson stepped into the light, one hand clutching his side, blood staining his jacket. His eyes burned with hatred. "You just don't know when to quit, do you, old woman?" he rasped. Marty raised the revolver. "Put it down, Rhett, you're bleeding out." He smirked weakly. You think that matters? You ruined everything. My family built this town. My grandfather, my father. They kept it alive while people like you sat on your porches and gossiped. They built it on bodies, she shot back. Kittrell, those miners, how many others? They built it to last, he snarled, stepping closer. You think anyone would still be here if it weren't for loss and money? We kept the mines open. We paid the sheriff. We fed this place by stealing from widows and burying the truth. He raised his gun, hand trembling. You don't understand. You're just another ghost clinging to the past. Maybe, Marty said softly. But ghosts remember. Rhett hesitated, just long enough for Boone to move. The dog lunged, knocking his arm aside as the gun fired. The shot echoed off the stone walls, deafening. Marty fired back instinctively, once, twice. Rhett staggered backwards, striking the wall, and slumped to the ground. His weapon clattered across the floor. Silence followed. Marty stood there shaking, smoke curling from her revolver's barrel. Boone padded back to her side, whining softly. When she approached, Rhett was still breathing, but barely. Blood pooled around him, dark and spreading. He looked up at her, eyes glassy. You don't get it. The truth won't change a damn thing. Marty knelt beside him, jaw tight. Maybe not, but it'll end you. His breath rattled once, then stopped. For a long while she just sat there, staring at the body. The rain outside had begun again, faint and steady. It trickled through the cracks above, dripping into the underground stream. When she finally stood, her knees ached and her hands shook. But her purpose was clear. She gathered the ledgers, photographs, and the sealed insurance contracts, everything she could fit into an oilcloth sack. Boone followed as she climbed the stairs back to the surface, leaving Rhett's body where it lay. The grey dawn light filtered through the broken windows of the mill. Smoke still hung in the air from the earlier gunfire. Her truck sat waiting, tires half sunk in mud. She drove straight to town. By the time she reached the sheriff's office, Caleb Rowe was already there, red-eyed and pacing. When he saw the sack in her hands, his expression turned grim. "Jesus, Marty," he said, taking it from her. "What did you do?" "What I had to." He glanced through the contents, his eyes widening at the stamped documents and notarized papers. "You actually found it. It was all under the mill. Rhett was down there too." "He won't be coming back." Rowe's face hardened. "You sure?" She nodded once. He exhaled slowly, then looked at her with something like sorrow. "You know this'll tear the town apart. Every old name in that ledger, they're all descendants of the men who signed those deals. Half the county's built on Lawson money. Then maybe it's time we see what it's built on top of," she said quietly. Rowe gave a weary nod. "I'll take it from here. I'll call the state police. Let them handle the fallout." But Marty shook her head. "No, you call Abigail Carter. Let her publish the truth. Don't let this die in some evidence locker." He hesitated, then nodded. "You've got more grit than the whole town combined, you know that?" She managed a faint smile. "Just old bones that never learned to quit." The days that followed blurred together. News spread like wildfire. Lawson heir found dead in mill explosion. Historic fraud uncovered in Whisper Creek. Decades of corruption tied to local dynasty. Abigail's article hit the front page of 3 major papers, complete with scanned copies of the ledgers and insurance claims. The governor's office announced an investigation. Property seizures began. The Lawson estate was frozen. Whisper Creek buzzed with shock and disbelief, but beneath it, something else stirred. Relief. For the first time in decades, people spoke freely about the past, about the miners, the disappearances, the debts. The lies that had kept the valley quiet were finally breaking apart. A week later, Marty stood once more by the riverbank, watching the mill from a distance. The morning sun cut through the mist, painting the old structure in gold and grey. Beside her, Boone sat with his head on her knee. "Guess that's that," she murmured. "She's finally empty." But as the Waterwheel creaked faintly, she realized it wasn't entirely true. Empty wasn't the right word. Freed was closer. The past had finally been drained from the valley like silt from a flooded stream. Sheriff Rowe joined her, hands in his coat pockets. "Cleanup crews will be here by noon," he said. State wants to preserve the site as a historical landmark. She raised an eyebrow. A monument to murder and greed? He smiled faintly. A monument to truth. People should remember what happens when you bury it. She nodded slowly. Maybe they will. He looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "What'll you do now?" "Maybe fix up the old cabin. Maybe plant that garden I've been putting off." She smiled faintly. "Maybe just breathe for a while," he chuckled. "You've earned it." That evening, when the valley fell quiet again, Marty sat on her porch with Boone and a cup of coffee gone cold. The crickets had returned, singing along the creek, and the stars shimmered faintly through the clearing mist. She thought of the names in that ledger, the men who'd built their fortunes on lies, the families who'd paid the price. She thought of Kittrell, whose ghost had waited all this time for someone to listen, and for the first time in years. She didn't feel like she was running from the past. She had walked straight into it, faced it, and come out the other side. Boone rested his head against her knee, eyes half closed. The morning after the storm, a pale mist clung to the valley like breath held too long. Smoke rose thinly from the ruins of the old mill, curling upward into a sky bruised with dawn. Marty Kincaid stood near the creek, her coat soaked, boots heavy with mud. Boone whined at her side, ears pricked toward the silence that followed the gunfire. Rhett Lawson was gone. The last thing she remembered was the sound of splintering wood, a flash of movement near the sluice gate, and the roar of water breaking through the lower chamber. When she came to, he was nowhere to be found, just the echo of the creek swallowing what was left of the night. Now, as she stared at the twisted wreckage, a part of her wanted to believe the flood had taken him. But another part, the older, sharper part, knew men like Rhett didn't drown easy. Behind her, Abigail Carter approached, her coat torn and face pale. "It's over," she said quietly, though her voice carried little conviction. "Not yet," Marty replied. "He's still out there, and he's not finished." Abigail glanced at the mill's broken wheel, its timbers jutting like bones. "Then what do you call this?" Marty turned to face her. "A warning shot." They spent the rest of the morning digging through what the flood had uncovered. The lower chamber, previously sealed behind decades of silt and rot, had split open when the sluice collapsed. Beneath it lay a stone tunnel, its entrance half blocked by debris. Nell arrived near noon, wrapped in a patchwork shawl and looking far older than she had 2 days ago. "You sure you want to go down there?" she asked, eyeing the dark mouth of the tunnel. Marty nodded. "That ledger led here." "There's something Rhett didn't want found." Abigail switched on her flashlight. "Then let's finish this." The air inside was damp and foul, thick with mold and the sweet stench of decay. The tunnel sloped gently downward, carved directly into the bedrock. Water trickled along the floor, feeding the creek outside. After 50 yards, the passage opened into a vaulted chamber braced with rusted beams. At its center stood a massive iron safe, half buried in mud. Abigail whistled low. "Well, I'll be damned." Marty approached, brushing her hand across the corroded door. The lettering was faint but still legible. Lawson Mercantile Co., 1935. "This is it," she murmured. "The missing vault," Nell coughed softly behind her. "Looks heavy enough to hold half the county's sins." With Abigail's help, Marty pried at the locking wheel, using a crowbar scavenged from the wreck. The metal groaned, then gave way with a hollow snap. When the door swung open, a wave of cold air rushed out. Stale, ancient inside were stacks of waterlogged ledgers, crumbling papers, and several rotted burlap sacks that spilled their contents when touched. Gold coins, hundreds of them, glinting faintly beneath layers of grime. Abigail knelt, her hands trembling. "Good God, this isn't just insurance fraud money. This is Depression-era gold, illegal stockpiles. The Lawsons must have hoarded it when Roosevelt banned private ownership and killed anyone who got too close," Marty said. Her flashlight beam caught something else in the far corner of the vault, an old wooden crate, sealed with pitch. The markings on its lid were barely visible under the mold. Property of Silver Creek Mining Co. She pried it open with her knife. Inside lay a stack of folders wrapped in oilskin. She unrolled the top one, revealing a faded report stamped with the state seal. Mine Safety Inspection, December 1936, she read. Signed by Michael Kittrell. Nell leaned over her shoulder. That's the missing file. The one they said never existed. Abigail scanned the pages. Look here, he filed a complaint against Lawson Mercantile for falsifying equipment logs. He claimed the mine collapse was preventable, that they cut corners on supports to pocket the insurance. Marty's jaw tightened, and they silenced him for it. The last page bore Kittrell's signature, and beneath it a blood-red fingerprint. Abigail's eyes darkened. That's not ink. No, Marty said softly. It's his mark. He knew they'd kill him, so he left proof. They exchanged a long, heavy silence. Then Nell spoke. We've got to get this to the press now, before Lawson makes his next move. By the time they returned to town, the mist had lifted, leaving the streets eerily still. Abigail parked behind the diner, out of sight of the main road. She planned to drive straight to Asheville that evening and upload everything to her editor's encrypted server. But as they approached the door, Marty froze. Across the street, Rhett Lawson's truck sat idling. He was leaning against the hood, arm in a sling, face pale but eyes burning with that same unshakable arrogance. Abigail's breath caught. Jesus Christ. He's alive, Rhett straightened slowly. You found it, didn't you? He called, voice hoarse. My grandfather's vault. Marty stepped forward, her revolver hidden beneath her coat. It wasn't his, she said. It belonged to the men he buried. Rhett's smile was slow and bitter. You think anyone's going to believe your little story? The papers won't touch it without corroboration. And by the time they do, that evidence will be ash. He glanced toward the street corner. Two black SUVs idled there, no plates, tinted windows. Federal men. Abigail whispered. Rhett chuckled. Hardly. Old family friends. Before he could say more, Boone growled sharply. A door opened on the diner porch. Sheriff Rowe stepped out, shotgun leveled. That's far enough, Rhett, he said. You're under arrest. For what? Rhett sneered. Conspiracy, murder, fraud. Take your pick. Rhett raised his good hand mockingly. And who's your witness, Sheriff? That washed-up mill rat? He nodded toward Marty. She's been trespassing, breaking into county property, firing weapons. You'll be booking her before the day's over. Rose's finger twitched on the trigger. Not this time. Then everything happened at once. One of the SUV's doors opened, and a man stepped out. Tall, black coat, rifle raised. A shot rang out. Rose staggered, hit in the shoulder. Boone barked wildly, charging forward. Marty dove behind the truck, returning fire. Abigail dragged the sheriff behind cover, pressing her scarf against the wound. Stay with me, she shouted. Rowe gritted his teeth. Get that evidence out of here. Rhett ducked behind his truck, firing blindly. You think you can take me down, old man? My family built this town. Then it's time we rebuilt it without you. Marty growled, taking aim. Her bullet shattered the mirror beside his head. He swore, rolling to the side. Boone lunged from the mud, clamping his jaws on Rhett's coat sleeve and dragging him backward. Rhett screamed, striking out with his pistol. The shot went wide, grazing Marty's arm. She ignored it, advancing steadily until the barrel of her revolver was inches from his face. It's over, she said. He glared up at her, mud and blood streaking his jaw. You're just like Kittrell. You think the truth changes anything? The Lawsons will still own this valley when you're dust. Maybe, she said. But your name dies with you. She fired. The gunshot echoed through Whisper Creek, rolling down the empty streets like thunder. Rhett Lawson crumpled into the mud, his weapon slipping from his grasp. Boone stepped back, panting. Marty lowered her gun, breathing hard. Abigail emerged from behind the truck, pale but steady. He's dead. Marty nodded. This time, yeah. 3 days later, the storm finally broke for good. Sunlight washed over the valley, glinting off the swollen creek and the ruined mill. The newspapers hit stands across North Carolina with a front-page story that read, Lawson family empire exposed in 80-year fraud scandal. Abigail's article ran with photographs of the recovered vault, the ledgers, and Michael Kittrell's sealed report. Federal investigators arrived within days, seizing properties, freezing accounts, and reopening half-forgotten case files. Whisper Creek was never the same again. Marty stood on her porch, watching the mist roll off the hills. Her arm was bandaged but healing. Boone lay at her feet, head resting on her boot. Sheriff Rowe, alive and recovering, had stopped by that morning to thank her and Nell for their statements. "Never thought I'd see the day this place got clean," he'd said, shaking his head. "Guess you were right to dig." Now, as the evening settled in, Marty felt a strange stillness she hadn't known in years. Not peace exactly, but something close. Nell joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "So what happens now?" she asked. In the misty valleys of western North Carolina, 65-year-old widow Marty Kincaid was about to uncover a secret buried for decades. What started as inspecting her $10 crumbling mill took a shocking turn when her dog Boone pawed at the Waterwheel, revealing bundles of decaying cash, $3 million hidden inside. Marty, a retired park ranger known for courage and sharp instincts, had no idea she was stepping into danger and moral conflict. What began as a peaceful retirement would ignite a fight for justice and change Whisper Creek forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The road to Whisper Creek wound through a dense canopy of maples and oaks, their late autumn leaves bleeding orange and rust beneath the mist. Marty Kincaid gripped the steering wheel of her old Ford Ranger, her arthritic fingers stiff from the drive. Boone, her golden retriever, sat upright in the passenger seat, nose pressed to the window, tail thumping in rhythm with the rough gravel beneath the tires. "Almost there." "Boy," she murmured, her voice low, weathered by solitude. $10 for a piece of history. What could go wrong? The truck crested a rise, and there it was, the Kittrell Mill. Even in ruin, it held a kind of tragic majesty. The tall wooden structure slouched against the riverbank like an old soldier long past his prime. Moss crept along its siding, and the waterwheel, once the heart of its rhythm, lay half-collapsed, its paddles choked by vines. The creek ran thin beneath it, whispering softly over stones slick with time. Marty cut the engine. The silence that followed was almost reverent. She stepped out, breathing in the damp, earthy air. The sound of the forest filled in around her, wind sighing through bare limbs, the distant call of a crow, Boone's excited sniffing at the weeds. She stood for a long moment, just taking it in. For all its decay, the mill felt alive, watching, waiting. "Home sweet home," she said, though her voice cracked halfway through the words. The county deed was still folded in her coat pocket. Bought at auction for $10, more out of sentiment than sense. She'd once worked nearby as a ranger before her husband Dan passed. The mountains had always been her solace. Now in her 65th year, they were all she had left. She walked slowly along the creek's edge, Boone trotting beside her. The boards of the old mill groaned as the wind shifted through its gaps. She touched the weathered siding, felt the faint pulse of damp wood. "You've seen better days," she whispered. Boone froze, ears perked, staring at the collapsed waterwheel. A low growl rumbled from his throat. "What is it, boy?" He barked once, sharp, insistent, and pawed at the soil near the wheel's base. The ground was soft there, disturbed, darker than the rest. Marty crouched, her knees protesting. "Probably a raccoon nest or something," she muttered. Boone didn't seem convinced. He kept pawing, digging small clumps loose until she caught a whiff of something metallic and damp, old iron and rot. She straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. "All right, Boone, enough. You're gonna dig to China." The dog whined softly but obeyed. Still, when she turned toward the truck to fetch her tool bag, she couldn't shake the image of that dark patch of earth. It looked like the ground itself was breathing. Later that afternoon, Marty drove into town. Whisper Creek wasn't much anymore. One diner, a gas station, a general store with faded lettering, and a post office that looked ready to collapse under the weight of its own history. Inside the diner, conversation quieted as she entered. Locals glanced up from their coffee cups, measuring her with the polite curiosity small towns reserve for outsiders. "Afternoon," she offered with a nod. A waitress in her 50s, apron dusted with flour, smiled cautiously. "You're the lady who bought the Kittrell place, ain't you?" Marty nodded. "That's me." The waitress exchanged a look with the man at the counter. "Well, bless your heart. That old mill's got stories." "Stories?" Marty asked. The man spoke up, voice gravelly from years of cigarettes. "Ain't a soul lasted more'n a season out there. Place is cursed, far as some folks say." "Cursed how?" He shrugged. "Depends who you ask. Some say folks disappeared out there back in the 30s. Others say it's just bad luck. Either way, Whisper Creek's got long memories." Marty's lips curved into a faint smile. "Well, I've dealt with worse than bad luck." The man studied her a moment longer. "You keep that dog close, ma'am. He'll know before you do if something's wrong." She finished her coffee in silence. When she stood to leave, the waitress added quietly, "If you hear something at night, don't go looking." The afternoon light was fading when she returned to the mill. The sun dipped low behind the mountains, casting long shadows that stretched across the river. Boone bounded ahead, tail wagging, as if eager to prove the mill harmless. Marty unloaded her tools and walked the perimeter again, noting the warped boards, the cracked stone foundation, the way the waterwheel seemed to lean toward the creek like a weary old man. "Rot everywhere," she muttered, prying at a rusted hinge. "Gonna take months just to make this safe." A crunch of gravel behind her made her turn. A man stood near the edge of the clearing, a tall figure in a tan sheriff's jacket, broad-shouldered, with sunburned skin and grey threading through his beard. His hand rested casually on his belt, near the badge clipped to his hip. "Ma'am," he greeted, voice measured. "Sheriff Caleb Rowe." Marty wiped her palms on her jeans. "You're not here to tell me the place is haunted too, are you?" His mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Not officially. Just wanted to welcome you, make sure you knew what you were getting into." "I bought it fair and square," she said. He nodded. "You did. $10, right? Not to argue with that." His eyes drifted toward the mill. "Kittrell Mill's got some history. My granddad used to talk about it, said it ran liquor during Prohibition. Folks made good money till one day the whole operation just vanished. People too vanished." She repeated. He shrugged. "That's how stories go around here. Might be half true, might be none of it. But this place—" He paused, scanning the building as if it might speak. "It's got a way of keeping secrets." Boone barked from near the waterwheel again, sharp and uneasy. Caleb's gaze followed the sound. "That dog's smart. You listened to him."